Well, the visit is almost coming to an end. It ends tomorrow. What is tomorrow? The 6th of June. And he spent about 3 days in New York. I mean, not he, the entire delegation. There were 9 people, which included two former foreign ministers, Bilawal and Hina Rabbani Kar, two former ambassadors to the United States, Sharif Rahman and Jilani Saab, and then there were other ministers like Mossadegh Malik, two foreign secretaries and all, and they spent 3 days in New York, meeting, mainly meeting UN officials. They met the UN Secretary General, President of the Security Council for this month. They also Muslim ambassadors to the UN. I mean, the OIC ambassadors to the UN. Then they also met some U.S. lawmakers at Conant Club in New York before coming to Washington. But before talking about Washington, let me say a few things about what they did in New York. One of the things that drew much attention was what Bilawal said in his news conference at the United Nations. It was at the United Nations where he said that the Pakistani and Indian intelligence agencies, like he named agencies. He said the ISI and RAW. If what he said was that if the ISI and RAW work together, they cooperated in the fight against terrorism, then terrorism in the region can reduce significantly. And then he also said that Pakistan was willing to form a platform, a body, a committee or something where Pakistani and Indian officials who deal with anti-terrorism issues, they could meet, they could discuss the problem of terrorism, and they could jointly work to eradicate terrorism from South Asia. So that was very significant. It was very well received, and that showed Pakistan's intention that it is ready for a fresh start, that it is ready to work with India, and that it wants the international community to help facilitate dialogue with India, bilateral, multilateral, whatever type of dialogue. Pakistan is ready to participate. And then he came to Washington. And in Washington, he was more focused, obviously, on the United States. The purpose of the visit to Washington was to meet U.S. lawmakers and U.S. officials and inform them of the latest development in the region, the 6-day war between India and Pakistan, how quickly that war, and this was what not just Bilawal Bhutto-Zardari, but other members of his team, like Sharif Rahman, Senator Sharif Rahman, and Minister Mossadegh Malik, Hina Rabbani Kar, Amina Janjua, all of them, they had like separate arrangements. Like one was like to participate in joint meetings and joint gatherings, and there was to spread out and meet people individually. So they did meet a lot of people, and in all these meetings, the message that Pakistan the Pakistani delegation came with was that Pakistan recognizes the U.S. role in facilitating the ceasefire, and that it endorses the U.S. claim that it was President Trump and his team that prevented a nuclear war in South Asia, but India is still threatening Pakistan, that Indians are still saying this is not a ceasefire, it is just a pause, and that India will get back to the path of war. And so the Pakistani delegation's message was that the threat is still there, and as long as some of these issues like the dispute over Kashmir remains unresolved, this threat will always be there. And now is the time for the United Nations and for the United States, particularly the United States, because they were in Washington, for the United States to play a role in resolving the disputes diffusing tensions and ending this conflict between Pakistan and India. The Pakistani delegation, the Pakistani team, made it clear that Pakistan not only recognizes the U.S. role, but it is ready to work with the United States in facilitating this role. And that the United States, it is India that is running away from dialogue, that it is India that talks of war, not Pakistan. Pakistan very much believes in peace. Pakistan very much believes in talks. Pakistan very much believes in reconciliation. I think this message went quite well, particularly among U.S. lawmakers. They met the chairperson of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and almost the entire committee, other members of the committee, and they met U.S. senators, they met U.S. officials, and wherever they went, and of course they also spoke at a number of U.S. think tanks, actually a record number of U.S. think tanks, because there were 9 members of the team. So they did like this on what is today. Today is, I think, Thursday. On Thursday, they had a half-day Pakistan conference at the Middle East Institute. Then they went to other think tanks, and individually they address the audiences, and they presented their case in those think tanks. Then they had more than a dozen meetings and briefings with the U.S. media. They met the Pakistani community. They met other prominent members of the society in Washington, and I think they were able to convey their message. It was well received. But having said that, there is one thing that we should not forget, that India is also very influential in Washington, that the United States sees India as a close ally in its fight against China, and it wants India to play a key role in reducing China's influence in South Asia, in other regions and across the globe. And then India has a very large diaspora in the United States. There are at least four Indians who are members of the U.S. Congress. So India has a very strong lobby here. The Indian delegation was also here in Washington during this period. They are also leaving on Friday, like the Pakistani delegation. And today, which is Thursday, the Indian delegation, including their leader Shashi Tharoor, met the U.S. Vice President, Mr. J.D. Vance, and it was it was easy for them to meet J.D. Vance, as you know that Mr. Vance's wife is an Indian, and they were able to use their connections to facilitate this meeting, to make this meeting happen. So India also has a lot of influence in Washington. So it was never going to be a walkover for Pakistan. It was never going to be a one-way street. Both teams came. Both teams said what they wanted to say, and both teams had a receptive audience. Now you may ask me that what was the general sentiment in Washington? And I think that general sentiment in Washington, in a way, favors Pakistan, because the Americans realized during that conflict how quickly South Asia moved to a nuclear conflict, a nuclear war. And they do not want a nuclear war, first of all, because a nuclear war anywhere in the world will have a global impact, but also because as the former U.S. ambassador to Pakistan, Ann Patterson, said in her speech at the Middle East Institute today, that it is one of the most populated regions in the world. About 1.7 billion people live there. So nobody wants a nuclear war in that region, because that will have horrific consequences. And so they were willing to listen to any talk that stresses the need for peace, stresses the need for reducing tensions, and for preventing a nuclear war. They also were quite receptive to Pakistan's complaint that the Indians have unilaterally suspended the Indus Water Treaty, and that they are now planning to stop the flow of the Indus River into Pakistan. That is a huge concern for Pakistan because the lives of hundreds of millions of people depends on the Indus. And as Mr. Zardari, Bilawal Bhutto-Zardari, who was leading the Pakistani delegation, as you said in one of his speeches today, that Pakistan does not want a war, but it is ready to, if it is forced, it is ready to deal with it, and that stopping water will be an existential threat for Pakistan. Stopping water will endanger the life of millions of people, and if the water is indeed stopped, then Pakistan is ready to go to a war and defend its right over the Indus water. And that he said that if India stopped water, then India will be initiating the first nuclear war over water in the human history.